How to restart a program that has tried before is a really difficult question because it is an emotional one. The easiest way to start over again is someone new comes to the team and they didn't go through that heartache of what they feel like was a failure before.
Yeah.
So pulling a new person in to have that new energy, optimism, I think is a good way to get the ball rolling because what you're describing, I have had it happen to me. It's difficult to start again. And then the next thing that needs to happen is a retrospective of why we think that the last program didn't take off and didn't get traction. So a retrospective of why that happened might include 10 different areas. There are at least 10 very common reasons that these programs don't get traction.
Welcome to season 4 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, AppSec enthusiast, and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Marisa Fagan, a lifelong community builder and security culture enthusiast. As the head of product at Katilyst, Marisa leads the development of security champion programs that empower security champions to drive cultural change. Previously, she served as head of trust culture and training at Atlassian and has managed security programs at Synopsys, Salesforce, and Meta. Marisa is also an active contributor to OWASP Security Champions Guide. In this episode, we'll dive into some of the questions Marisa didn't have time to cover in her talk at BSides San Francisco. We'll also explore how security culture programs must be tailored to different teams to succeed, how to reboot struggling programs, often caused by disengaging training content, and why passion often outweighs technical skills for roles like this. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Marisa's opinions. Dive right in.
Hi, Marisa. I'm super excited to have you on the Elephant and AppSec podcast. Thank you so much for joining in this the fourth season. Very glad to met you in person in BSides and saw your talk there as well. You got a lot of questions. Like you were among the ones that actually got a lot. And I think it was very interesting because I already read on that topic, so I was also a bit familiar with the security champions because of my conversations like multiple times with Dustin, your colleague.
Yeah.
And your talk was about the 4 tribes of security champions. And I think a lot of other organizations, when I talk, with the security engineers, security leaders there, not all of them have this, customization, and a lot think about, one size fits all approach, and think about security culture, as just one thing that fits everything. Why actually you've mentioned, those 4 tribes that are critical for success?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for being our moderator in the BSides SF talk where we covered this back in April. And you've captured some of the questions that came from our audience. So that's really exciting to follow up, to get an opportunity to answer some of those questions like this one. So I think that we, as security practitioners, we want there to be like a very cut and dry answer to these questions. Is this correct or is this not correct? But when you're dealing with people and culture programs, it's rarely so cut and dry, but people want to be on the right track. And so that's why I put together kind of a framework to give some structure to these culture programs and to give people a way to categorize examples. And so I created a kind of a sort of a magic quadrant style diagram where we have on the left side, we have programs for security culture that are focused on detection and response, or they're focused on corporate security, security awareness for all employees. And then on the right-hand side of this 4-quadrant diagram, we have programs that are designed for developers that really focus on application and product security for kind of a subset of the company. And then, of course, in a quadrants, we need our top and bottom. I have the top is really tactical practitioners that are doing security practices. So practices such as threat modeling, practices such as reporting phishing, reporting strange behaviors, those things that have workflows that are designed for employees to participate. And then the bottom quadrants are more learning focused. They are participating through taking trainings, doing CTFs, Security Awareness Month, those sorts of things that really build a community. And the point of the talk really was to say that there's no one way to do a security culture program. And so there really aren't wrong ways either. There are simply more defined charters and less
Mhm.
defined. So if you have a plan, you can get through any different style and be successful.
Mm,
So kind of to come back to the question, why are some programs successful or not? It really comes down to the fact that some programs have had well-defined plans
mm,
and they focus on a plan to measure and show success. And some programs are just not that mature and they haven't had the structure put into place to really be a program that has a defined plan. And yeah, so that's the kind of tweak that I would say on people's thinking that's really important as we become a more mature field of practice. That we're really seeing a lot of these patterns repeat themselves in other companies. That was a
yeah.
long answer, but I think a good way to set up kind of what we're talking about.
It's very interesting that you talk about the plan, because I think maybe it depends also on the company's maturity. Because sometimes, you can see in some organizations actually like a dedicated security culture roles, and in a lot of organizations, there are none. So how in this case, like in your opinion, who should be the person, managing this security culture plan?
It's funny, there's a distinction between maturity of a company and size of a company. And people often assume that larger companies get more mature as they grow larger, but that is actually almost the opposite of what happens. The more people you add to a program, the more indoctrination and onboarding and growing you have to do of those people. And it becomes more complex and actually less mature as you lose your coverage of these really strict structural programs that you've put in place. So I would not say that the most mature companies I have seen are actually your largest companies like a Salesforce or a Google
Mm,
or Meta. Those are actually, there's a lot of variety there as well. So if we look at the study done by SANS on the Securing the Human paper that they put out about the maturity of security awareness programs, what they have found is that the most mature programs are actually the ones that have teams associated with them. So, a really good start is a security technical program manager that owns a program for security awareness. And the same is true for security champions, whether that's for an awareness program or a developer relationship. So, one technical program manager or a security product engineer, that is a person that is dedicated to running this program is a very important first step. And it can be a part of a larger team. A really successful place to put a person like this is in the product security team if they're a developer relationship manager. But it doesn't have to be that way. You could have this dedicated program manager resource sitting in any part of the security org, but they need to have access to the rest of the company. So I have found that it's most successful if your technical program manager is senior level
mm.
and if they have the communication skills and the passion to really drive programs, initiatives across the entire company. So these are people that are excited about presenting in front of leadership. They're excited about building bridges and cross team collaboration. And so those sorts of things are really important skills to have and experience to draw from in order to have a successful program owner.
Let's say you have a person, who you're hiring, for this position or promoting internally between the two, and one person has more technical skills and another person has more passion. Which one would you choose? What is more important?
I would choose passion every time, of course, because this person doesn't operate in a silo. In fact, the whole reason that the whole drive for their role is to break down silos. And so a person that is good at collaborating and pulling a little bit of support from everyone around them, the team together, is going to be a much more successful person than perhaps somebody who has the knowledge and the security technical skills to go it alone, and they could write their own training, they could deliver their own content, and they could actually do all of the security reviews for everybody. This role is not about doing the security roles for everyone else. This is the role that teaches everyone else how to do it for themselves. It's enabling. So it's one role where counterintuitively the security engineering skills are kind of the backup, and communication skills are really front and center.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. I think in security, all about, especially like in security culture, it's all about communication and being able, to tailor enough or sometimes the words that you use or your communication style, depending who you're addressing, because you, for example, mentioned the different parts of like developers, you mentioned the rest of the organization, and of course, product security developers, they will care about one thing versus like finance department, that will care absolutely about the different thing, that different things will matter for them. And like in your experience, sometimes do you think like security teams overlook one part or the other? Like maybe sometimes they focus too much on the development side of things, while sometimes like it's more about, business logic of application, and sometimes you have to talk about different part or tribe of the organization.
Yeah, and that's a really natural thing for people to a really natural trap for people to fall into, that you're going to be biased towards your comfort zone. Teams and programs are built up of people that are trying to be successful. And so, very often, subconsciously, we are over indexing on the things that we're good at. And so that's why hiring and your first question was so important, of who you put in the team that drives this. It's not so much because it's bad to be good at security engineering, but you really need to set up the team where people are allowed to play to their strengths, and it feels good to be successful based on things you're good at. So setting the team up from the start with people that are good at the skills that you need. It's another observation that kind of comes along with this, is that security often in general has this problem. So this isn't unique at all to security champions program management. All of the different parts of security have this. And what we see is that sometimes security champions programs are the trigger for a much larger change management project across the entire security org, across the entire company. It can be a trigger point for change that is very exciting to see when a company is mature enough to realize that they need glue to pull different silos together.
Hmm.
That's really the point where I see that I've been in a part of a lot of company maturity efforts that are really exciting to see. And sometimes they do start with realizing that, okay, first we realize we need a security champions program. Maybe it's because BSIM or SAM talk about it, or I think it also talks about security champions. Maybe there was some sort of compliance, or maybe customers are talking about requiring developers to do secure coding training, and they want to make that more successful. So maybe that's the trigger, but usually it comes from some sort of holistic change from the company level. And that's how companies realize that they are a good candidate to start security champions programs. But once they start that, then they start asking all of these questions. Well, what are the champions going to do? And that's when they realize, oh, we can't track when a security champion does a vulnerability ticket without having vulnerability tickets.
Yeah.
We can't tell them that they have done a good job without having a baseline for what wasn't a good job before. And all of these things start to mature around a culture program because culture is based on people, but it's also process and it's also technology. The technology part often has been a little bit ignored, set it and forget it. But once you start pulling at threads, you realize that you can't just mature one of those legs of the stool. You have to mature everything to make a people program successful.
And would you set up then the metrics for each of those parts? So for people part, there's a certain set of metrics for processes and for technology. Like how would you define then for each part that it is success?
Yeah, that's a great approach to think about the whole success as kind of three different areas, three buckets or legs is a great way to make sure that you have a good, even approach for how you're thinking about these metrics. So a people metric could be like training is completed by 100% of your population. The process metric could be this certain workflow is being completed every time. When somebody opens a ticket, those tickets get closed in 24 hours or 7 days, whatever you need that process to be. And then the technology element is that you have some sort of listening or scanning tool, and the tool has its own metrics, whatever that may be. You have a number of events or a number of instances, number of tickets, number of vulnerabilities. Those sorts of things are your technology part of the three-part metrics. And then, from there, really, I have seen companies do metrics so differently across all of the organizations that it's hard to be prescriptive. But from there, one thing that you can know for sure is that your metrics should look like everybody else's metrics. So whatever the leadership is telling you that they need from you, that is what you should focus on. So at the end of the day, if I were to tell you you should have three metrics, one process, one tech, and one people, just make sure that it's still in the terms that the CTO is looking for,
Yeah.
that it looks very similar to the other types of metrics that are being published. And then you can get it published in the single pane of glass that your leadership is looking at. And that is so important for the longevity of a program because it's an endorsement of your work, but it also shows not just the impact of your program, not just the impact of the security team, but if you can put a metric about security champions into CTO leadership dashboard, this is showing the input that the engineering org or the rest of the employees have on the impact of security posture of the company. This, like very few other metrics, is about the company-wide effort to come together to make security like an important part of the company. So when it's done right, the metric is absolutely like a real multiplier for the success of all of the teams.
Have you seen any of like concrete examples of the metrics on the CTO side that were uh, easier to validate also from security culture standpoint, or easiest to tie to?
If they were easy, they probably wouldn't be all of that impactful. Like
Mhm.
the story that they tell wouldn't
Yeah.
be that exciting. But the one that comes to mind, which is kind of a balance, is training. So training is often the first place people start because you have this great platform that measures the concepts. So it can give you kind of a knowledge number and it gives you coverage. So it'll tell you how many times, how many people are taking the training. And so in order to make it valuable, you should, I think, focus on the knowledge kinds of numbers. So in simple terms, that would be like quiz scores, but you could, explore your LMS and find out how they're delivering a more nuanced number than just quiz score percentages. But then just, tell that story, how that is a example or a symbol of the security knowledge in the company, and that translates into security posture. So training is one of them. And then another, I think, happy medium between ability to track and the story that it tells is tracking how many times security practices have been completed. So threat models, how many times are those done? And you can kind of add to that as you travel around your company. You'll find more examples of security practices that can be tracked either through tickets
Mhm.
or maybe the tool themselves has usage data. But anytime that you have a tool that is being used by a team that isn't the security team, and you can weave those into the SDLC, figure out how to also track how many times they're being used. And that's often something that you push on your vendor and you say, vendor, I need usage data. I need to know how much value we're getting out of this tool that we're paying for. How many times was it used? And then
Yeah.
you add that up month over month. And so you say, how many Jira tickets were closed? How many times was this other tool used? How many time was threat model or run? And add all of that together. And then month over month, you can see that there is more security work being done. It's either more because you've added more people to your population. Great. Or it's more because you've added more practices per person. Amazing. Or it's more because you've added more tools and you kept adding how many tools are possible to add to this number of practices per month number. All of those are great ways to improve. And so you're really set up for success. There are multiple ways that you could be successful. And they're all legitimate. They all tell the story that more security work per day, per month is being done in the teams. Something just to catch you before your next question, something that people often come back to me with when I tell them that you should just track number of times these practices happen. What I usually hear in response is, well, how does that capture the quality of this work?
That's a good question. That's a really good question.
The threat models could be crap. They could just have blank pages. You know, a metric is a symbol, it's not the work itself. So if you're worried that your threat model diagrams are going to be incomplete, then work on the process to make sure there's a check to make sure if they're complete. If you're worried that that these practices won't be good, that's a different problem that you can also fix.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that because especially, as you mentioned, like completeness of training in the beginning of like the metric, like it's so easy for someone just to put, the training video of like 10 minutes, 2x speed, do something in the background and forget about anything that was being said. So it's really hard to know that the person actually like listened and understood that they maybe should enable, MFA on their tools and things like that. And that it's, sometimes not straightforward if it's just like one metric, and that you just have to look at that because your company tells you to look at that. And I think in a lot of cases, like some people, it was also one of the questions, post the conference, like some people try to start their security champion programs. They try to start building that security culture, but they do not succeed. Like, how do you recommend after, let's say, this initial failure moment to actually restart the new program with probably better foundations, better like training materials, but if it didn't work out the first time?
So, how to restart a program that has tried before is a really difficult question because it is an emotional one. The easiest way to start over again is someone new comes to the team and they didn't go through that heartache of what they feel like was a failure before.
Yeah.
So pulling a new person in to have that new energy, optimism, I think is a good way to get the ball rolling because what you're describing, I have had it happen to me. It's difficult to start again. And then the next thing that needs to happen is a retrospective of why we think that the last program didn't take off and didn't get traction. I won't call it a failure because, nothing is a failure for trying, and especially if those changes that were made, like we talked about before, the maturity of the whole system, the whole org probably got some good maturity and updates along the way. So no failures, but maybe just not starting to not the traction you were hoping to get. So a retrospective of why that happened might include several different there's 10 different areas in a blog post that I wrote for Katilyst called the top 10 blunders
Okay,
that you
I'll
can.
look it up.
Yeah, we'll add the link, that would be great. So there are at least 10 very common reasons that these programs don't get traction. Um, the one that I think is kind of a good segue from your previous question that comes to mind now to highlight is that the content isn't engaging. So to put it in simplest terms, that training content and the practices that you're asking people to do don't feel relevant or important enough for people to prioritize. That's real. Like those people are making that decision and you can't really force them
Yeah.
to be motivated by something that isn't motivating them. So you sort of need to accept that as a fact that while you thought it was exciting, it wasn't broadly exciting to enough people and rethink it. So, for example, there is something we're all very familiar with, which is phishing simulations. Phishing simulations have this problem more than any because they don't really cross the threshold of feeling important to people. People don't understand why they have to go through the troubles that you're asking them to go through. And so I like to approach either a phishing training or any other kind of training with first a why is this important? Why are we doing this? Why do we want to spend the company's money on
Mm.
this? And your time is valuable. If you can't tell a persuasive story, don't do it. Don't do that training. And you'll instead get that social capital and that credibility. People will say, hey, I was doing these really tedious phishing simulations before, and the security team now says we don't have to do it because they couldn't provide enough of a reason that
Mm.
this was happening. So that's the first thing that my industry has really had to come to grips with is we were not telling the story of why our trainings were providing value. They were right to not give us traction on those things. They were not good enough. So they're in this retrospective of why your Security Champions program needs to be rebooted. A lot of self-reflection really needs to happen. And you keep having to ask yourself the 5 whys. Why did no one take the training? Why didn't they think it was good enough? Why wasn't it good enough? And then why was it important in the first place? That last one, I think, is really the heart of things. We say things need to happen that actually just don't need to happen. If you spend 10 years at a company that hasn't been doing it up to this point, are those impacts actually happening? It's not it's not a good prioritization to say that we should be training people on things that are more than 10 years away from happening. You
Yeah,
know, it's a once in a 100-year thing. This is all just classic risk management prioritization. There's you can't train everyone on everything. You need to be ruthlessly prioritizing, and
like
that
in
needs to all.
startups.
Yes, have a startup mindset, exactly.
Yeah, I think I love your point of view about the content being not interesting enough because it's actually one of the questions I even had for you because quite often I've like some teams who have it's again coming back, to your point that we love to fall back on that we feel that are familiar for us because a lot of like security teams, especially like the ones that are more on the technical side, they kind of underestimate the power of content and the power of like building, that security team brand. And actually, so that people listen to you because you're there, like actually listen to them and help them and kind of tailored content to their needs. Because especially now, like with the age, of social media, it's you can see that people's attention is just snaps like that, and because of the content as well. And I think in a lot of cases, they kind of underestimated more focus, on guardrails. Let's send like just another phishing email. So like this, they learn, that they shouldn't click on it. But yeah, if you don't communicate with why they shouldn't click on it before that, then it's just not going to work in a long run. And at least that's what I've seen. Not at my current company, but some companies before that, because we did have phishing
Right.
training. And also, like, one of the questions that was at the session was about one task is about zero trust, because it's actually, like, I've heard some people saying it's more of a buzzword. We shouldn't implement it because it's like everywhere, and another people on the other side, it's the only thing we should do because we should not trust people. How do you like? Does it actually fit in the culture? Is it actually? Do you think some people push it because they've heard this terminology? It's so trendy, but not because it's actually practical.
I love this question as a topic to discuss for security culture. I don't think it's often brought up as a cultural issue, but there's so many facets to why this is actually a culture issue. First of all, calling it zero trust is just a branding nightmare.
Yeah.
It's zero trust of your employees. Great. The only upside of that is that you're not asking them to do anything, because if they needed to do anything or install anything or use an MFA solution and not get around it, you have really offended them. You've lost their trust. Now they have zero trust in you.
Yep.
So that's the first thing I would say is I would call it something different. Can we call it like 100% support?
Mm.
Full support, not zero trust. We're going to protect you. So full protection, and we're not going to let you make mistakes that you shouldn't be able to make. That's sort of the branding that I think it needs to have. But yeah, I love that it's a technology solution, but it has people implications. And so explaining to people how the security team is supporting them with this it's kind of that other leg of the stool. You can't just roll out technology without having a communications plan to people about how it works. If you do have the communications plan and it's a positive spin and it shows how you're supporting your employees and making their jobs easier and better, then I think absolutely that is the way to go. And zero trust, or it's kind of as an idea, we see it in a couple of places where you're just installing these guardrails so that employees can't do something that they are not supposed to be able to do. I think those things are really great. And then the third leg of our stool is process. So how do all of those things fit together? I would just, about zero trust, I would say yes, but call it full support, not zero trust, and make sure that you include a communications plan in your rollout to make it the most successful.
Yeah, I think again, like as you mentioned, communication from the start was like the whole theme of this episode. I think it's so easy to create just the small things internally to actually communicate why you shouldn't download this application from the internet and install it on your laptop. Just a small pop-up, and people will understand better, instead of just forbidding blindly, no, you can't do it. But yeah, if you explain it well, then everyone is always receptive. And there is one question I now ask at always, at the end of the episode in the fourth season. What is your least favorite security buzzword and why?
Buzzword. I hope it's a few words together, but obviously I hate the phrase people are the weakest link. That's
Yeah.
of course something that we've started to leave in the behind, but I think there are still some people that think it, so actually people are your best opportunity, they're your biggest protection landscape. And so I think still we have some laggards that are not totally bought into this, but yeah, that's what I think.
You just have to educate them well, and that will be your strongest opportunity, for sure. And if there would be one book that you would recommend for someone, maybe someone who would love to learn more about how to build a better security culture, how to be a better communicator, what would it be?
People-Centric Security by Lance Hayden. I talked about it in my talk.
Mhm.
And the BSides SF talks are published now, so I hope we can
Yep. I
cross-link
will
to
definitely link
these.
it in yeah.
So you'll find that People-Centric Security is a book that's I mentioned there. It's also talked about in a lot of different places, and People-Centric Security has the competing cultures framework that a lot of my research is based upon. So that's definitely where I would start.
Okay, great. I will definitely put that in the link of the episode for sure. Thank you so much, Marisa, for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much. It was very, very fun.
Amazing. Yeah, fun for me too. I'm so glad I got to be on.
Thank